Right, good morning everyone. Welcome to the meeting of the Employment Committee. Can I welcome those online as well today? As usual, the meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. The link is available on the Council's website. Can I ask that all members and officers have their microphones on mute until they wish or are invited to speak, and that officers show their camera only when presenting reports? I have received apologies today from Mr. Bedford and welcome Mrs. Page, who's substituting for him. So moving on to the agenda, item 1 is firstly we need to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of May 2022. They're on pages 3 to 8 of your agenda pack. I move that the minutes of the meeting held on the 26th of May be taken as read, confirmed and signed. Can I have a seconder? Thank you.
Seconded, Chair.
Okay, all in favour? Thank you. Item 2 is question time. I have received no questions from members of the public. Item 3, questions asked by members. There you go. Try it again. Right. Yeah, asked by members under standing orders. I've received no questions from members this morning. To advise item 4 of any items which Chairman. Yeah, look at that. No, I tell you what, I'll move chair. Just bear with me. I know we've had a lot of problems with the cameras and the video conferencing kits at County Hall in all rooms this week, including the main chamber. So let's try this one. Right, apologies. Yeah, going back, advice of items, Chairman's decided to take certain urgent anywhere else on the agenda. I've not been notified of any items. Item 5, declarations of interest. Do anyone have any interest in respect of any items on the agenda? No? Okay, thank you. Item 6, presentations of petitions under Standing Order 35. We have no petitions today. So I'll move on to item 7, which is our first report, which is on the pay policy statement. Pages 9 to 26 of your agenda pack. Sarah Short, the HR Services Manager, will present the report. So Sarah, over to yourself. Thank you.
Good morning. The purpose of the report is to seek approval for the Council's pay policy statement prior to forwarding to the County Council for approval in December 2022. Under the Localism Act 2011, councils are required to produce and publish a pay policy statement for each financial year. The 2023-24 statement must be published by the 1st of April 2023. For the purpose of the pay policy statement, remuneration includes basic salary, pension, and any other allowances that arise from the employment contract. The grading of all posts, with the exception of centrally employed teachers, is determined by using the Hay Job Evaluation Scheme to ensure a fair, consistent and non-discriminatory process, and that the Council is compliant with equal pay legislation. Agreement on the 2022-23 National Joint Council and Chief Officer Pay Awards was announced on the 1st of November, and a separate report on the pay award follows on this agenda. And I do apologise for all the changing dates. I know it is slightly confusing. We have updated Appendix B of the pay policy statement report to reflect the new pay scales, and Appendix A will be updated prior to submission to Council. The other aspects of the pay policy statement remain unchanged from the previous statement that was published in 2022. The committee is therefore asked to approve the Council's pay policy statement for the 2023-24 year for submission to the County Council, and to recommend its approval by Council on the 7th of December 2022, subject to the changes outlined above, to enable us to meet our statutory obligations to publish by the 1st of April 2023. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Does anyone have any questions from members? No, I think it is a standard sort of annual event. So Okay, if there's no questions, we are asked to approve the pay policy 23-24 for submission to the County Council for approval at its meeting on the 1st of December 2022. Does everyone agree? Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sarah. All right, on to the next. Our next report, item 8, is the Pay Awards 22-23, on pages 27 to 30 of your agenda pack. Again, Sarah will present this report. So, Sarah, over to yourself.
Thank you, Chairman. This follows nicely on from the previous report. The purpose of this report is to seek approval from Employment Committee for the implementation of the 2022-23 pay award for employees on National Joint Council terms and conditions and also on Chief Officer terms and conditions. The announcement of the agreement of the 2022-23 award was made by email on the 1st of November 2022, and work has commenced to apply £1,925 to points on the current pace, to all points on the current pay spine, whilst the council, Work has commenced to apply the £1,925 pounds, which is the pay award, to all points on the current pay spine. Whilst the council has adopted local pay scales, it is committed to applying the relevant nationally agreed pay award. In addition to the £1,925 on all NJC pay points, the NJC agreement also increases the annual leave entitlement by 1 day. The NJC is also committed to enter into discussions with the trade unions on policies on home working, mental health support and family leave policies, including those on maternity leave. As was the case in 2021-22, this was a majority agreement as Unite members voted to reject the offer, and we understand that Unite intends to launch local campaigns on pay and terms and conditions. In terms of the Chief Executive's pay offer, an offer has been made to Chief Executives of a similar amount of £1,925. The Association of Local Government Chief Executives has submitted a revised pay claim of 3.5 to 4% to the national employers. And we understand that Alice are due to meet those national employers tomorrow on the 18th of November. In terms of costs, the anticipated net cost of the pay award this year is £11.5 million. That is £7 million more than was budgeted. And that is a reflection, I think, of the situation that we find ourselves in terms of the cost of living crisis. So it is recommended that the committee approve the implementation of the pay award for NJC employees and chief officers and note progress on the pay offer for chief executives.
Thank you, Sarah. Members, do any questions? No? Very well, thank you. We are asked to approve the implementation of the 22-23 pay awards for NJC staff and chief officers and note the position in relation to the pay award for chief executives. Do you all agree? Thank you. Moving on to item 9, which is the settlement agreements on pages 31 to 34 of the agenda pack. Again, Sarah will present the report.
Thank you. This is not on pay. So the purpose of this report is to provide Employment Committee with an overview of the process for settlement agreements following the introduction of statutory guidance in May 2022 by the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. This is about making the making and disclosure of special severance payments by local authorities. This followed withdrawal of regulations in February 2021 on the cap on public sector exit pay payments. The recent guidance sets out the parameters when special severance payments may be appropriate, and it also defines special severance payments as a payment that is made to employees as an additional discretionary sum paid on top of statutory and contractual redundancy or severance terms. It includes any payments reached under a settlement agreement and certain pay in lieu of notice payments. Redundancy payments, pension strain cost, and payments made as part of an ACAS early conciliation procedure, and payments ordered by a court or tribunal or agreed as part of a judicial or non-judicial mediation are not treated as special severance payments for the purpose of this guidance. The approval process is laid out at paragraph 10 of the report. And provides that special severance payments over £100,000 and above should be approved by a vote of full council. Severance payments of £20,000 and above must be personally approved and signed off by the head of paid service. And special severance payments below £20,000 must be approved according to the local authority scheme of delegation. Our current arrangements in terms of special payments are broadly in line with the approval process that's laid out by DHULC. So the recommendation is for Employment Committee to note the overview of the development of an approval process as required by the statutory guidance on making and disclosing special severance payments by local authorities.
Thanks again, Sarah. Members, any questions? Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whilst I accept it, I find it rather hard and strange when the situation, the country is in such a state that when people exit and they have greater payments beyond what they're owed, it's normal practice, I understand, but it's a comment that, you know, I'm not sure how the public could swallow that because it's their taxes that pay for it. It's a comment, Mr. Chairman, not a proposition or probably even a criticism. I know it's what it is, but we have the job to talk to the public, and the public who pick up on things like this, and you'd be surprised how much, because everybody has access to everything nowadays, and it's a hard job to defend a situation when they understand a document quite like that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Gordon.
Sorry, I know it wasn't a question, but just address it. We're just talking as Sarah was presenting. I don't believe that we've ever been in a position where a payment of that magnitude has been made. As you say, everything's in the public domain. We get FOIs occasionally, freedom of information requests around settlement, you know, Taxpayers Alliance or whatever it may be. And there are circumstances where settlement agreements have their place. They're obviously confidential on both sides, but the vast majority are extremely low figures. So if you end up taking the average of what we pay in settlement agreements, the average is a fairly low figure. And if there was a significant payment, it would be with HR, legal advice, director sign off, etc., and be appropriate to the circumstances of that case.
Thank you, Gordon. You've opened a door. Could you? No, it's not disrespectful at all, I can assure you. What would you sort of average then? What is the average sort? So I've got an inkling, because people look at big numbers like I've suggested, but you really know that it's nothing like that. If I could have some sort of feedback so I understand if people challenge me on this, what it's all about. Thank you.
I think in more straightforward cases, we would be looking at perhaps the notice period. So somebody going quickly and being paid their notice period, which typically would be 3 months. Obviously, in more complex cases, there would be, you know, potential for additional payments because we're buying out a risk, and it's very much a risk based. So I can't give you figures. We could, if necessary, do some work in the background and look at our averages. But typically, we start with notice period, and then we look at the level of risk that we're buying out, and we're talking about risk of challenge, risk of tribunal, and awards made by tribunals, etc.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Just out of interest, then, if we were to start breaching some of these figures, would that come back to the Employment Committee just so that we get a heads up on what's going on at the next Employment Committee?
Sarah?
It would, in terms of those payments, so anything between 20,000 and 100,000 would have to be signed off by the head of paid service with a record of the leader's approval. So that would be the route of approval that we're proposing in line with the statutory guidance.
Yeah, it's not so much I'm looking for approval, but just so that we get a record of it, so that we understand. We've got a report before us that says this is our policy. It'd be quite nice if we actually went into some of these areas. It just come back before us just to let us know that was what was happening.
Yeah, we would be able to report kind of the average figures. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? No? Okay, we were asked to note the overview provided on the development and approval process for settlements agreement as required by the statutory guidance issued in May 2022 on the making and disclosure of special severance payments by local authorities. So we've had that. Does everyone agree? Everyone's happy? Okay, thank you. Sarah, thank you for your reports. Item 10 is the attendance management report, which is on pages 35 to 40 of your agenda packs. Online, we have Andrea Denham, HR Business Partner, who will present the report. So, Andrea, good morning, and over to yourself.
Good morning. The purpose of the report today is to provide Employment Committee with an updated position on sickness absence. The report gives the absence position at the end of June. As stated in the purpose, I'm due to bring a updated position, which is at the end of Q2. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put that onto the screen for you. This will be available to be circulated and to Employment Committee, and also will be being published as well. So if you can just give me one moment, I'm just going to share those figures because they're going to give you an extra column for Q2 and then update the FTE days lost and the total cost column. So rather than read those figures out, I'll have them on the screen for you. So just one moment. Can somebody just confirm you can see those?
Yeah, we can see them. Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. Okay, so on the 16th of September 2001, the committee considered the council's absence position at the end of March 21. We've had a acknowledged gap, a long gap in reporting due to a number of issues with our reporting since we changed our HR and payroll system over. So in terms of the report and the new figures, I'm going to have a bit of an updated commentary in terms of over the page at point 5. Where we are in terms of our current position, the absence was going up in the main, up towards sort of from the end of 2021 up towards Q1, and then from Q1 to Q2 in the main we've started to see some improvements, so that is a good indication. So if I'd brought this report to you previously, obviously that trajectory was very concerning. There is still a lot of work to do, but we have started to turn a corner, which is a positive indication. Moving on to the reasons for absence, this is at the end of Q1. The presentation of reasons does stay reasonably stable, so I think this is still something we can take some good indications from. So in terms of looking at our top 10 reasons for absence, plus the not disclosed category, so stress, mental health, depression continues to be our highest reason for time lost. And this has been over for those of you that have been members of Employment Committee or have read the reports in this area or been interested in our sickness absence, you will have known that this has been her main reason for time lost due to absence for a long period of time, and is also the reason that our comparator councils lose time as well. COVID-19 has increased in its percentage of time lost. The reason that we believe this has happened when we actually look at the cases and we look at what's happening in the community is early on in the COVID pandemic, obviously with all the social distancing and the way that COVID was presenting, obviously it was a much more serious illness. Fewer people were getting it, but it was much more serious. As we came out of social distancing, the masks have become less in use, and well, the general hygiene has relaxed in terms of people's use. We see more people catching COVID, but it's a milder illness. But what we have seen is the last two strains of COVID, so Delta and Omicron, we found that a larger percentage of our workforce caught those strains, and actually what it did is it presented more like flu, and many people had to take to their bed for a week, sometimes 2 weeks, to actually recover from that. Even when they were working from home, they weren't able to perform their duties because they were significantly unwell and unable to work. So we see that COVID absence going up significantly. One of the things that I've also pointed out is the long-term COVID, and you may well, as individuals, know people that have unfortunately been suffering from long-term COVID. It's a strange and diverse illness. It doesn't have one way of presenting, but we do have a number of individuals, and I checked the information live yesterday. We now still have 10 individuals in our workforce that have long-term COVID, and still that one person that we're trying to work with to try and get their ill health retirement resolved for them. It's a very complicated illness. The NHS is still trying to work out how to support individuals and how to work with the support individuals. So long COVID is a tricky illness for us to work with, and particularly with pensions and ill health retirement. It's not a illness that's classified, and you may well have read in the media about how pensions are struggling to classify long COVID for people who aren't able to work long term. Over the page, the long and short term absence split looks very much like how we usually see it presented. Between sort of 50 and 60% of our absence is long term. This is usually how we see our absence presented, and we know that where we focus our efforts on trying to resolve the length of our long-term sickness cases, and then for our short term, making sure that we have really good robust practice in terms of return to works, following up our short-term triggers for the short-term sickness. That's what brings us results. So that good back to basics with our short-term absence, and then using our resources that we have in place to help resolve our long-term sickness. That's how we get results with our sickness absence. And then at point 9 is the service level data. With the Adults and Communities Department, we've had some changes in the organisational structure in the system, which has affected the way that some of the absence figures are presented. When we have a big structural change, it does take a year for those figures to completely level out. So and I've made some notes at the bottom of the table. If some of those look slightly unusual, that is why, because we've moved some of the workforce and the absence figures around between some of the boxes. And then moving to the end of the report, this report is for Employment Committee to note, but I would welcome any questions or any observations or recommendations that Employment Committee would like to make. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Andra. Yeah, there's a few hands going up. So first of all, I'll take Richard, and then Bertie, and then Linda. Richard.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question on item 6, the sickness absence and the reasons for it. I appreciate and welcome the fact that there is, I'll say loosely nowadays, much more understanding and recognition of the importance of mental health. That's a really good thing. My question is, whose task is it to diagnose or determine that stress, depression, mental health is the reason for sickness absence?
If I can respond to that. So in terms of mental health absence, it would be an individual to report that their sickness absence was due to mental health, but actually the journey to somebody being absent from work would start before that. And actually, we have a number of tools, wellbeing checks. Obviously, Colin Jones, our health and safety manager, is in the room with us today, and we have risk assessments around stress, etc. There are a number of tools for managers to use. Our supervision process for them to be checking in with their staff around their well-being, and particularly around the ways of working and the hybrid work that people are doing at the moment, for us to be able to, as managers, be checking on the signs of people to make sure that we pick up early if we believe that we can see that people have issues with their mental health, and that we can take action and support people way before there becomes a issue that requires them to take away from work. What we know from doing some more detailed work on sickness absence is that many of the reasons for these absences are complex. We know that maybe a third of them are down to bereavements. We know that many of them are a complex nature of things that are at home as well as work. So they can be where people have got stresses that mix together that you wouldn't necessarily see coming from just one angle. But it really is in the hands of managers to be able to know their staff and identify things. But in terms of classifying whether or not somebody has an absence that is due to mental health, that is down to the individual with their GP side, whether or not that has reached a level where they need to take that time away from work and seek whatever medical support they need.
Thank you, Chairman. That's very helpful, thank you. And I noticed you mentioned the GP's involvement. So my other question, if I may, which of course comes from no medical knowledge on my own part at all, those terms, stress, depression, mental health, those three terms, as a non-medical person, seem to be quite broad and, if I can say, a rather loose combination of terms. Is it possible to sort of distinguish between them, and would it be useful to do so? And secondly, is it possible? Because I say they seem to be rather a loose combination of terms there. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I understand completely where you're coming from. What we actually find often is we have our GP medical notes often put stress, depression on a sick note together, and they don't actually pull those definitions apart themselves. And when we ask individuals to be able to say, is it stress, is it depression, they find it, they find it very difficult to pull the things apart from one another. But I do understand where you're coming from, and we have had this debate at many points about whether or not we might be able to classify one from the other. Also, could we classify work related or home related? And what we find is all of these things are mixed together, but unfortunately the GPs don't seem to be able to pull those two things apart for us, and they do regularly put both on the same doctor's note.
Thank you. Well, if GPs can't, then that's obviously where we are. Thank you for your explanation.
Thank you.
Bertie.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Quick question to be following on from Richard. With staff more working from home at the moment, do we tend to find that some staff who would otherwise, shouldn't be working but are working through illness, is that happening at all with working from home?
I think what we find is that individuals can find ways of working around minor illness. We don't encourage people to work if they are seriously unwell, because what happens is that they will become more unwell and actually they take longer out of the business, and that affects productivity. So, but what we find is that people will either they'll be able to speak to their manager through smarter working, they'll be able to rest at the point where they need to rest and then work later on and catch up. So people have more flexibility to be able to not take time off if they can work around a minor illness. But I think if I circle back to what I was saying about Omicron and Delta, where we thought we might be able, as we were going into those periods of time and we thought, well, people are going to get COVID, they'll probably be able to work through, some symptoms. What we found is that people were, I don't know if any of you had it, they were floored by it, and actually they had high temperatures, they were very sick, they needed to go to bed, and actually they couldn't work. So we found that there were a number of people across the workforce that had to go to bed for, up to a week. There are a couple that were, it was longer than that. So we can work, some people and many people will work around minor illness to keep on track with their responsibilities, because it's in their interest to keep on track with their work. That's how I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything to add to that.
No, that's fine. Thanks, Andrew. So, okay, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Mine was on a similar vein, actually, to say, did you feel that people working from home, it made it, had an improvement on the figures? And you've actually answered that. The stress, depression and mental health, which, as you say, is the highest thing, do you anticipate, given the cost of living and everything else, that those figures are likely to rise in the future? Because you've only got to look at the news and it is affecting so many people. So do you anticipate that that will rise? And also looking at the figures, I mean, on the majority, the figures have gone down for absence. And what would you put that down to? Thank you.
Thank you. So we've been trying to look ahead at what we believe will help to manage and support our workforce. And actually, Sarah Short, obviously, who's with us today, a member of her team, has been doing some proactive work in the very early start of the indications of the cost of living crisis to pull together an offer and a range of support around financial well-being. So much of our well-being support previously focused on the classic physical well-being, mental health well-being, but our offer in terms of financial well-being hadn't been as developed. But actually, we've had, and actually Caroline is watching the call today, so thank you very much to Caroline Rowe, who's observing today. We have a suite of help which is on the intranet. I can send the link through if members are interested, for staff to be able to access information, anything from credit unions to information about warm homes. There's a range of information around as being able to claim back travel expenses on a weekly basis, different things. So there are things that we can't prevent. We can't prevent the cost of living crisis, but what we've been able to do is look ahead and try and provide as much support as we can. In terms of the improvements, we've been as a people services team, we've been trying to look at where our most significant cases are and try to work with those. So we've been working business partners with our advisory team to try and work on those cases to try and reduce the absence as best we can. I believe that the improvements are out of that joint working that we're making, and also focusing on getting back to basics with much of the first line following up of triggers. So there's some focused work in terms of getting back to basics on absence, which I think is really helping to improve attendance. I'm going to touch some wood, feeling very fortunate at this moment. I had expected a further Omicron Delta style strain of COVID, and thus far, I have not seen one. That was one concern that I'd had, and if we had that, obviously that would present like flu. We've had, obviously we've been promoting flu and COVID vaccination. Uptake within the council has been relatively positive as a public-facing organisation, and obviously housing public health. So I think we're doing all the right things. Can we prevent? It's very difficult, but we can definitely treat and do our best to try and support staff during this period.
Andrea, thanks for that. That's a really good answer. I think we're holding on to the tables at the moment. We have wooden.
Yeah,
furniture,
sorry,
so,
I'm tempted.
No, that's okay. Gordon
yeah.
wants just to come in. So Gordon.
Yeah, just really briefly, just taking the first question around cost of living from a different angle. I think you're absolutely right that there's a range of stressors and cost of living. We've got a budget statement today. Let's see where that all takes us. So people are really struggling, and we're very conscious that a significant part of our a significant percentage of our organisation are what we would class as low paid. I think the budget uncertainty, the gap we have, how we're going to manage that, despite reassurances about how well run we are, how we'll work our way through the MTFS, etc., there are real worrying messages out there for people, and there's no getting away from that. I think what Andrew's really helpfully done, though, is to just explain how we're trying to mitigate that, and a lot of this is around the quality of our communication and engagement, as well as some of those practical things, the advice and signposting, etc., we can do around support with cost of living. So there's a whole range of things that we're doing, but let's not hide from the realities for a lot of our staff.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Yeah, please do, Linda.
I think what you're doing is brilliant, that you've put it in place before we reach what could be a pandemic of people suffering from stress. We all know that in, say, adults and communities, that there are a lot of low-paid women workers who are possibly breadwinners for the family. There is also a shortage of staff in that area. How, and I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that we just up their wages, because that's not practical, it's not something we could afford to do anyway. But I do know of quite a few people who will leave the authority and go into retail, because actually carers, you can actually get paid more working on a supermarket till than you can doing caring. So although all this is put in place, which is brilliant, and as I say, I'm not suggesting that we can just up people's wages to manage it, but have we looked at something to retain these staff that, as well as what you've already put in place?
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good question. we've got a huge focus on recruitment and retention in so many more areas than we've ever done before. And, you know, there are cases where we have to apply market premium, but we have to be selective about that and really careful about that, because budgets are rather limited. So it becomes a bit of a vicious circle. And whilst we can talk about things like culture of the organisation, management support, learning development, all those good things that make it a good organisation, department, service, team, etc. to work for, we're under no illusion that people are saying, yeah, I'd love to stay, but I'm looking at my bottom line and I can earn more money. And, you know, we've even seen it in some other roles where people are saying, I'm willing to leave employment and become an agency worker for 6 or 12 months because I can earn so much more. So I'll give up my continuous service, my pension contributions. It is really hard. And we're doing whatever we can. And I think a lot of our, I was going to say strategic, but actually the short-term tactical conversations are around how we recruit and how we, excuse me, make ourselves attractive in the marketplace, and how we retain. And those, the solutions, if we can get the solutions, will be different in different services for obvious reasons. My voice is going with the emotion of it all.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. You happy with that, Linda? Okay, thank you. I'll have Barry, then Rosita, and then Dan. So all about the full house.
Thank you, Chair. When I look at statistics, obviously you're trying to drill down on that and compare. We've got this comparison now, Q1, 2, 3, 4. But what I don't have an idea of how we as a council are performing compared to outside the bubble. Now, it's something I raised at Adults and Communities a little while back, and the report started coming through with national statistics. And the last report that we had come through was really useful, and the staff said itself, really useful to get that information. Now, if I was going through this, I'd like to see the national statistics on reasons for absence. I'd be interested on those being comparable with other councils. I'd also be really interested in those how they're comparable with public sector versus a comparably sized private sector, because when I look at the stress levels, which is very high and it's concerning, but what's the reason for that? Is that because people are in the wrong job? Is that because we're asking too much of people? Are we not dealing with things correctly? When I look at the questions that have been asked, work from home, working here, I'd also split these statistics in people working from home and working here. Then again, you could pull from that. And if people working here were less stressful than people working from home, you'd have an answer straight away as to whether it's working, especially as we're going to these new ways of working. If we're moving more towards working from home, it could actually be that there's much less working from home stress, and that is a good way forward. But for me at the moment, I can't really drill down on the figures because I don't have anything to compare against outside of here. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, we've certainly provided comparator data before. Typically, we've looked at other counties because those are the most similar. And I certainly think we've been fairly far down the league table in the past, and just being honest about it. The last set of data that I think we got, which was March 22, there's been, as we know, it dropped during COVID. And you can see from the table that Andrew put up, it's then risen, and nationally it's risen across counties. And actually there's some huge spikes in some counties, far worse than us. So in terms of league table, we're probably, you know, in a better position. But this is a costly, risky area, regardless of our position in any league table. We can certainly provide that the next meeting. In terms of private sector comparators, we're always a little bit hesitant. It feels very different, and we've talked about this in employment committees in the past. And you know, it's hard saying the private sector because it's made up of so much, but typically sickness rates are lower. But then you start to look at how they get rid of people, how harsh it may be, you know, lack of retention, etc., and a little bit more cutthroat. And also sick pay schemes can be very, very basic. And there is something about, and we've debated this in the past, and there's something about a local government sick pay scheme which is really good, solid, but we have to make sure when we manage cases that people aren't exploiting it, and we manage within that. In terms of stress, when we've looked at county level reasons for absence, they've all been around that sort of 25 to 30% for stress, mental health, depression, or however we define it. So there is a consistency. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't be working hard to reduce that, but just to reassure you, there is a consistency across the upper tier local authorities that we've got some data from.
Thanks, I think that's it. If we could just get some of those figures in the next report, just give us a feel for where we're actually doing, where we're performing against others, rather than just ourselves.
Okay, thanks, Barry. Rosita.
Thank you, Chairman. Most of the points I jotted down have been adequately covered. I wanted to raise statistics and also the point Linda made in relation of retention of the lower paid workers. And so indulge me, because to me, one size doesn't fit all. And when we're looking even at the previous reports and wage increases, it's not our fault as a union, they are taken right across. But for a person who is at the lower end of the wage scale, an increase wouldn't hardly cover the council tax increases, the oil bills and whatever else. And so there are issues within all the different sections. So my kind of thought, and it disturbs me, is that one size doesn't fit all, that we need to look at those people who are at the lower scale because these reports are public. You look at some wages, they're obscene. And then there is somebody at the lower end who is, seriously struggling. So it has been said that we are kind of looking at it, but I think there's got to be more to it. Or maybe as an authority, we need to look at lobbying our unions, that, say, for instance, a wage increase for somebody of £100,000 shouldn't be the same as somebody at the lower end. Why should it go through that step increase? But then I'd like to go back to we're saying the absence days are down. And again, it disturbs me a little bit because, of course, absence days are down. When I'm poorly and I'm at home, I can still work, but when I'm coming in, then I probably... So we're not really measuring productivity to the best, and I wonder how we can address that. Because, for instance, if I got a hangover, if I'm ill, I can switch my computer on. Doesn't mean I'm productive. So that is one of my concerns. And going back to mental depression, I think, and reading the next report on ways of working, one of the things said that some members might be pressured into working from home. Now that really, really disturbs me. While I'm all for a hybrid scheme, and I shall make comments on the next report, but it disturbs me that some members could be members of our workforce could be pressured into working from home. Now, when you are working from home, and I can also speak from personal experience, when you go into the office, you exchange anecdotes. If you're depressed, you cheer up, you share a cup of coffee. There is and social interaction. When you're at home, you stare at your four walls. And if you're feeling worse, you start getting more and more depressed. And I can see if we are pressuring people into this hybrid model, rather than encouraging them to come back to work, to have interaction, to have a laugh, to have a cup of coffee, we are not getting the same productivity. We're going to get more and more mental depressions. And then we talked about warm homes. Well, you see, those people who are at the lower end are going to, if they're hybrid working, sitting at home. I've seen people sitting on Teams meeting with a coat on. You know, how can they afford to heat their home? This place is heated as it is anyway. So why do we not look at instead of encouraging this and giving them warm home cost, to make sure that those people come in and are being cared for in here? And I think that is all. They're my comments. And I think what I'm trying to say is one size doesn't fit all, to repeat, and we need to unpick these things to make sure that, you know, we have the right model for the right people. Thank you.
Just before Gordon comes in, I think certainly some of your questions do come into the next paper, but whether you want to pick them up now, Gordon, or just wait till the next one. Gordon.
Okay, thanks. I was going to suggest that I pick up the comment about pressure to work from home, and also is there a cost of living impact on where people work. I'll pick that up in the next paper if that's okay. Just in terms of our lowest paid, and just sort of frantically scribbling as you talked there, but the couple of things on pay. Obviously nationally, the settlement, as we've seen through an earlier paper, was a flat rate. And that flat rate gives our lowest paid just over 10% increase. And as you move up the grades, that logically that increase is a much lower percentage. And it's interesting where Alice, the Chief Exec's Professional Association, has come back in and is talking about not necessarily following that, but looking for a percentage increase. So we'll see where that gets to. Obviously, now that this year's pay claim has been settled, we're on the verge of next year's pay claim. Don't get any rest. And given cost of living, continuing increases to inflation, all the stuff that we've just talked about around recruitment and retention, low pay, etc., it will be really interesting to see the staff sides, you know, the national trade unions starting point around next year's pay claim, which we're anticipating will come in nationally fairly soon. I suppose the other comment around pay goes back to recruitment and retention, and just in terms of, we look at some of our lowest paid staff and people who are perhaps working part-time or working locally to where they live, and accepting that, you know, the conversations around Amazon or supermarkets or whatever, we sometimes have to look at what our comparators and our competitors are. So we had a conversation with one department recently who were looking at fairly low paid staff and saying, oh yeah, but in this area of the country, in that area of the country, look at what they're paid, but they won't move to go there. So what is our real risk? Our real risk is them going to another sector locally. And we didn't have the data for that, so it sort of sent them back to look at that. So we need to be really clear. So for example, if we're comparing to the private sector, then let's hang on till the pay increase comes in for local government, because that may help. If we're comparing to another local authority, they'll get the pay increase as well. So that doesn't help. And we need to keep thinking about what we can do to support. And I think I'll pick up the productivity point as well, if it's okay, in the next paper.
Chairman, may I just come back with one question? Because so we are all actually are singing from the same hymn sheet, and we're having the same problem probably in the NHS, where, you know, you have the lower ones. So we are quite powerful with unions. Is there something that we can actually do to lobby government, rather to look at it, and or unions to address that balance, because the balance is totally out of kilter? Thank you.
I think there's a couple of things there. I think in terms of pay negotiations, my take on it would be that locally and probably at a regional level, and even some of the national negotiators, they get it in terms of affordability. When you get to the trade unions, national execs, it's much more politicized, and that's about, this is my take on it, that's about in part lobbying government. Now, what the employers did as well this year was they wrote to government at the point they were making the offer of 1925 to say, we know that local authorities are going to struggle, and part of their lobbying was to say, put more money into local government. So it was a real bind, I think, for the national employers to say, we know what's happening in the economy. We need to make a sensible pay offer, but we get the points around affordability and the impact that might have. And you heard the figures from Sarah earlier and what the gap was compared to her initial budgeted figure. And, you know, we budgeted for more next year, but we don't know where we'll end up. So that, you know, when you're in those national negotiations, there's a lack of local control, and we try and influence it through regional pay briefings. I think there's a lot of this which is about lobbying, whether that's successful or not, but that's not my debate.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Thanks, Rosita. It's interesting, the County Council Network published a paper, I think, last week, and they're looking at probably between 6 and 7% average for 23-24. So it's going to be a figure that will be comparative to sort of this year, but that's the view there. Dan.
First of all, I'd like to thank Andrea for her report, and the way she presented it was excellent. I'd be interested to know, because I've not obviously got that sheet in front of me, that latest sheet you presented. There was one column with the total costs of absency and what it meant. Total, yes. If we could have that,
I took it down.
if we could have that in as a totalised number, and it all helps so we can understand what we're dealing with. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you very much indeed. Also, you made a comment slightly about the impact on sickness and people being at home, but didn't go into too much detail on that. But I think, truthfully, Mr. Chairman, the elephant in the room is obviously stress, depression. When you look at the charts we've got in front of us, my latest chart was 26.7% for that particular element. But you look at the old traditional ones like muscular and skeletal, these are athletes, footballers, tennis, whatever. These are the people who have shoulder problems, hips, knees, and all sorts. And even that is sort of at a level now that is sort of dropping back from its high. Neck and back, well, that's the oldest one of the lot. I've got a bad back, so I can't come in today. But you see, we've got one figure that's racing ahead. It may fluctuate a little bit, but and I'll deal with it later on the next item, but visualize somebody in the smallest room in the house, normally the smallest bedroom possibly, if they can. And it is that literal, those four walls, and that's it. There's no chatting with anybody, there's no socializing. And we as human beings are herds and gatherers. We talk in groups together, we love the group thing. And I just feel that, you know, you're not going to be able to answer it because you're not going to be able to alter a situation. You know, when people work in groups, they're friendly, they chat, they know each other really well, they know their children's names, birthdays even. You know, the group thing is a great thing. So somebody comes in a bit worried and stressed, will talk to somebody and people can either soothe them, encourage them or support them. You haven't got that, and this is going to get worse now. Gordon knows I've been talking about the depression and the problems, but excuse me, it's even slightly worse for us. Not only are they going through this problem as individuals, but there will be compensation and damage claims to us as an authority once people get going. We've all heard of the medical people chasing lawyers. There's set groups and about medical injuries and medical problems in a place of work. And I just feel that, you know, we've rushed into it because COVID actually forced us into it. But we didn't want to leave it, and now we're trying to create it as a way forward. But I think that will bear on these figures because I can't see them dramatically just dropping down to what we'd think is acceptable levels. And if we're causing this as an organisation, as a body and employer, distress to people, not deliberately, but we are indirectly by saying you're working from home. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. I know we'll talk more later on, but anyway, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Dan.
Chairman, would I just be able to make a comment on that?
Yeah, please do,
just
Andrea.
in terms of a statistical point of view. I completely understand the perspective, and I can hear from a number of the members that they've got concerns about the impact of working from home in an individual environment. I think from a statistical point of view, I've been working on attendance management, I think for at least 7 years. I'd have to go and check my files, to be fair. Stress, mental health, depression as a percentage of our absence has always been in this range. It didn't go up. We thought it would go up during the COVID, but actually we expected there might be an impact through the lockdown period. When we changed our ways of working very suddenly, and then obviously we went through a long period of changing to hybrid working more formally, we haven't seen big rises or big changes in stress, mental health, depression that would lead me to believe statistically that the two were linked. I'm not saying that there isn't a link. However, I wouldn't, from the statistics, I wouldn't say that there isn't a sudden change in stress, mental health at those particular points when those changes were made. But that's just my observation on the figures. If that provides any reassurance.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. Dan just wants to come back in. Yeah, Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very grateful for your thoughts, Andrea, but they are your thoughts and they're not medically backed and scientifically backed. So with respect, I'd just make that comment, but I do respect the effort and the thought that's going into it. And I thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thanks all. Can I thank members for a good set of questions, good answers from the officers as well, so thank you for that. I think we've asked for the addition of absence comparative data and peer comparison amongst other authorities, and obviously the largest reason for sort of absence, the breakdown of stress, depression and mental health. So I think any works that we can get on that for future meetings will be really useful. So thank you. We're asked to note the update provided by Council's overall position on sickness absence within this report as at the end of June 2022. And we did have the update today that Andrea put on the screen, so I look forward to getting a copy of that hard copy and the update provided on the more recent position. So thank you very much. Members are asked to note. Happy with that? Does everyone agree? Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. Item 11 is corporate ways of working, pages 41 to 52 in the agenda pack. So Gordon, our Assistant Director for Corporate Resources, corporate responses, it says. Yeah, is here to respond to your report, Gordon. Yeah, thank you.
Always respond corporately. Okay, I'm probably going to change just how I present this based on the previous discussions. I mean, in some ways, this report probably feels a little bit after the event, and it's just the way that the employment committees have fallen. But we had a set of scrutiny panel kind of task and finish group meetings about 10 months ago, and a report out of that came back to Scrutiny Commission early this year, and I've attached the action plan, or the kind of the plan that shows the risks and issues, and then the suggested actions and the action that we've been taking, just for information attached to the report. And clearly, since then, we've moved into implementation. And we're also having this conversation just before we have an all-member briefing at the end of the month, combined with a tour of room 700, which has been a pilot for setting out part of the workplace, collaboration furniture, etc., etc. So we'll do that at the end of the month. So some of what I'm going to say will probably pick up in that presentation as well to all members. I suppose under current activity in paragraph 4, again, I've just referred to the model office pilot, which is something, a shared space between adults and communities and environment and transport. We've got lots of feedback informally and through a survey, which will inform our next steps and inform what we also do in 700. We are having quite a lot of success in take up of leases from tenants, typically NHS tenants, utilising space that we know we don't need. We obviously would be very careful not to give up space until it's a bit like, you know, the building blocks. So for example, adults and ENT into 700, releases 600. We're looking at children's going into 600, but until we have a settled model there, we won't give up some of the areas that children's are currently in. So we need to make sure that we've got this right and that we land each department and each service in the right way with the right space. But there are significant opportunities to increase our rental income, which is a journey that's becoming very successful. We've got a considerable amount of organisation development support going in to make sure that teams who are, this is any teams, but also particularly those in room 700 and the work that's now starting in room 600, that actually we get the right culture, people understand. This will touch on some of the things I'll come back to from the previous debate. And we really exploit the benefits that were set out in the original business case. And we're also looking at productivity, and I'll come back to productivity in a second, so that managers can properly manage whether people are in the office or the workplace, whether they're working remotely, whether it's hybrid. But it's absolutely essential that we remain a productive and efficient organisation. If we look at the MTFS and the budget cuts that we've got coming, productivity and efficiency are going to be an absolute key focus. So if I could just come back to some of the points that were raised earlier, if I can understand my own scribbles. I think the first point was, is there pressure to work from home? We're a large organisation. We're probably talking about 3,000 staff who are included within the definitions of ways of working alike, so traditionally office-based workers. We have no permanent home workers, and we've said to every service head, create a fit for purpose action plan that will be different for each service, because the way they work is different, their customers are different, the way they need to operate. And exploit the benefits to the organisation, to the team and to the individual of coming into the workplace. What we've never said, and we don't want to say, and I'll keep having this argument, I think, is everybody comes in 2 days a week, because that's just for the sake of it. And some of us would come in and just end up sitting at our desks on Teams meetings through our laptops, and that's not what the aim of this is. The aim is around collaboration, well-being, and we've talked quite a lot about well-being. It's about a business benefit. It's for people to feel part of a team, mixed with colleagues, all the good stuff that we talked about earlier. Getting the balance right between being in a workplace and working remotely, whether someone is out on the road for most of the day and then go home to write up their reports or whatever they do, or whether they're at home all day. You know, it's different in different areas. We have different worker styles, excuse me, but nobody is compelled to work from home. In fact, what we're trying to do is to make sure that we keep bringing this to life. And I think what we're seeing is more individuals in the office, and use County Hall as the obvious example, but we're also crucially seeing lots of requests for medium and large size meeting rooms, because teams are coming in and teams are meeting together and working together, and that's definitely on the increase, and will continue to increase, which is exactly what we're looking at. absolutely take the point around remote working and the risk of isolation and then all the impact that goes with that. And it's incumbent on all our managers, and I'd go back to that organisation development piece that I talked about, of making sure that our leaders and our managers are asking the right questions. And we had this a lot during COVID, and it continues. And there's almost a very simple one-page manager's charter that we put out, which was, you know, in making sure people are engaged, making sure people aren't hiding, they're not staying off screen, you know, we're not compelling, but it's indicators, and that, you know, we're checking if they're okay, we're checking again, and we're encouraging people to come into the workplace to mix, etc. So it's some of it is just common sense, but you know, we've got a lot of people, got a lot of managers. Getting consistency around anything is difficult, but there's a lot of work from a policy and practical support perspective that is going on in the background to get us to that sort of, you know, level playing field, if you like, and the sort of baseline that we want. I think there are probably unintended consequences of the cost of living crisis, and I can't evidence it at the moment, but I think it will be interesting over the next 3 months to see whether people do say, well, I would like to come into the office because the office is heated and I can save on some heating at home and I can balance that with the cost of travel, etc. There is that, I was going to say, it's not even a risk, it's that possibility. And, you know, we have space in the office, we have fewer desks than we did, but we still have space in the office. And again, we would want every service to manage that, but absolutely see the possibilities there. The other bit around performance is we do have some work going on in the background around just managers using their existing indicators to manage their services. So what indicators do they use now? What performance indicators do they use now to know whether they're delivering a good service, they're being productive? Whether people work remotely or whether they work in a workplace, people can Skype in a workplace. You know, so the point earlier around switching your computer on at home and that's it. People can Skype whether they're in a workplace or not. So take a bigger picture. You know, some of our services, it's easier to monitor and manage. So the customer service centre, we know how long calls take to get answered. We know how long, you know, what the call rate answering is, for example, because we've got the systems to monitor. If you're not in that business of making widgets, but you're in a policy job or something else, or you're, you know, working casework or advising managers or whatever it may be, the measures are going to be different. So we're relying on our managers to come up with the right measures. I just refer members though also to, and I think it's called the Performance Compendium. So this is an annual thing that is produced by chief execs, the data and business intelligence team, and gives a view on performance at an organisational level, and also dips down into departments and services. And it's a very detailed compendium. But I think from the outline that I've read of it, it is still telling a good story. So I think we need to look at performance and productivity at a range of levels. And there are a huge number of impacts, huge number of reasons why perhaps an individual's performance or even a team's performance will increase or dip, not just because of where they work. And I just wouldn't want everything pinned on ways of working, because I think there are a whole range of other factors as well. Hopefully I've covered the points that were made earlier as well as this report.
Thanks, Gordon. Yeah, the performance compendium was at the scrutiny last week, and obviously that's the one that says we're the lowest funded county council, but we're the third top performing county council. So it's we are achieving, and that does measure, and that figure is across all sort of inputs. So it's useful. So I have Linda, Rosita, and then Bertie.
Thank you, Chair. I like this report. I'm pleased to hear that you're saying that nobody is pressured to work from home, but there are a lot of benefits to working from home, not only for the employer, but for the county council themselves. If somebody's working from home, they're not using their car to get here. You know, I do know somebody who works for our customer services, lives in Broughton Astley, can just go into her small bedroom, which she uses as an office, and turns on her computer, is answering calls and things straight away. Nothing to the environment, you know, using the car, and she's there on time, not battling traffic and things. So I think that's good. Somebody working from home and using a room in your house as an office can claim on the tax, to claim for heating, electricity, or they used to be. I've not done it, so I don't know exactly, but as far as I'm aware, they can. And I think, you know, from an employer point of view, once you've checked it out to make sure, I know that you used to be able to, if that is correct, then make sure that the staff that are working from home know that they can have a benefit from it. The fact that we are going to be able to hopefully release buildings. We've got buildings all around the county that some need repairs, some aren't in such good condition, you know, there's a cost to that. So therefore, by able to rent and somebody does it up themselves or get rid of the building, it's bringing money into, I know it's a one-off money if you're getting rid of it, but it's still money that is badly needed. With regards to being isolated, yes, some people will feel isolated, but I was happy to hear you say about the fact that there's rooms here that managers can say, right, well, we'll have a team meeting remotely this time, but next time we'll all meet together, so that it becomes a team meeting, but a social bit as well on the end of it, so that, you know, the county council is looking after people's welfare. So I think it's a good report. I'm not against home working at all. In fact, I quite liked it when all these meetings were remote and I didn't have to drive through Foss Park to get here, which is a nightmare, you know. So for me, it is a good scenario. I accept for others that it isn't. And as I say, I'm pleased to see that nobody is forced to do it, you know, that it is a choice. So I welcome the report and I think it's a brilliant report. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Zita.
Thank you. That's a wonderful thing about democracy. We can all have different opinions. Now, I kind of I'm in two minds about all of this, because, for instance, I believe that if you are, like you earlier said, it depends what you are doing, I think, and everything, again, one size does not fit all. And I just have to look at my notes now. Now, for instance, I don't mind working from home if I get a briefing and somebody talks at me, or, you know, but if I need to have interactions and I have to gauge somebody's body language, and then, you know, I have to be around the table. But coming back to my points, on this report. Now, as I understand, no contracts have actually been changed. So your employers are actually on a 9-to-5 contract, employees hour. Now, allowing a choice and flexibility and hybrid working is a benefit. So that it is something we have to work through, and we got to ensure, as I said, that the productivity is there. But to me, it is all about managers. And in one of the points, it says managers will be responsible for embedding and whatever. Now, measures, like you said, are different. And we got to ensure that those managers ensure the best outcomes. And if managers feel that their staff needs to be in, they should be able to do so. Because you know. Now, also, it is, you're talking about customer care. I talked to customer care and they found that maybe they couldn't get to somebody to get the answer. And I'm finding myself that I phone up and I need an answer to facilitate something with my residents, but I get no answer. Then the staff would say, oh, but I was working at night, right? That wasn't good managing, because somebody should have been there at all times. Or I get somebody saying, oh, well, you know, excuse me while my children are making that noise. Well, that's not acceptable when they were working in the office, you know. So staff have got on top of their contract an awful lot of benefits for allowing that choice, for saving childcare, for saving petrol, and they can possibly claim. And I think it is all about the managing, that it is right and that the outcomes are there. Now, I know that there are some probably members of our staff who are working extremely hard from home, more so than they did when they were in here. And so I think you have to balance it. So that's just my comment. But what I'm more concerned about is it is the it's page 49 and 50. My computer won't, it keeps shutting down. So, and I have to waffle because my comments are gone. We're talking about health and safety, and we're also talking about risks and ensuring the safety at home, and etc., etc. Now that worries me no end, because it's only covered very lightly in this report. Now, again, I hate personal anecdotes, but I once tried to answer the phone, rushed down the stairs, slipped, broke my leg. Right now, I know that this is something now that is being taken up in Europe. And I also have a friend who's got a business, and she was advised by her HR that she could be able to face an awful lot of claims because the COVID rules are not in place anymore. So we are talking different claims, and she was advised to inspect the homes and make sure that there are contractual arrangements. So in case, you know, we are looking forward to a claim culture from people working at home. So my waffling concluded, how do we beef up these things? How do we address it to combat future claims against us, to ensure that people don't say, you know, I've got a bad back now. And I know they had their £200, but they might not have bought a chair. I bought a chair, not under £200, but I never use it and ended up with a back. So how do we ensure that? How do we cover that? And how do we tighten that up? Because at the end of the day, whether I like hybrid working or not, that is the way we're going forward. So we've got to get it right. Oh, and I want to push back on you on the 2 days work. Well, yes, if it is not necessary, but people were in before and they actually worked from home. So, you know, it is not really a very good argument, Gordon, but thank you.
It's interesting. I'm sure the next report, Health and Safety and Wellbeing, and Colin's report will cover some of the incidents and sort of where the incidents occur. So I'm sure that'll be collected. So, Gordon.
Shall I have a go? Right. In a positive way. I think you're absolutely right around different services. Depends on what you're doing, depends on the nature of the service, and we need to make sensible decisions about the models for those services. You're absolutely right around no contractual changes. I think there are individual benefits to hybrid working, and I think there is a big point here that we're certainly not alone doing this. In fact, I don't know of any other local authority that isn't doing it. So our competitors, if we get back to recruitment and retention, for those areas who can benefit from, you know, a workplace strategy or a ways of working program, our competitors are all doing this as well. And we find that the market is shifting in terms of what people's expectations are. We can debate whether that's reasonable or unreasonable, but it's fact. The market is shifting in terms of what people are expecting. What we have to drive as well, though, and I would put this first, is the organisational benefits. So if we can get this right, and I think we are starting to get it right, around if I work, I'll say it, 3 days at home and 2 in the office, whether that's the right model or not, if I can then balance my work and the way that I work and what I achieve when I'm in the office versus what I achieve in the type of work I do when I'm working remotely, then the organisation gets a benefit. I might need to talk to my manager to come to some agreement about that, how that's going to work. There might be some weeks where I'm in the office more and working remotely less. But it's finding good business reasons for being in the workplace, which we could probably carry this debate on around the 2 days versus, for the sake of it versus good reasons. But it's the business reasons for doing it as well as for people's well-being, team building, and all the things I talked about before. Part of the action planning has to be around customer service and customer care. And I know we've had some separate conversations around this through SCG, and we're certainly pushing this message, regardless of who our customers are, whether they're internal or other departments, whether they're external customers, or whether it's a service we provide to members. It's all very well somebody saying, well, I'll have a break during the day and work in the evening. But actually, if your customers need you during that period, during the day, that's what your manager should be putting in place. If you're in the type of role where there can be flexibility about when you work, so you have a break during the day and you work in the evening, great, but not to the detriment of customers. And that's a really strong message that we're realising that we're having to put out. I might defer to Colin on the health and safety side of it from remote working, because there's a couple of things, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Colin.
Can I just please come back? So, I mean, we all agree it's not about the 3 days sitting in the office. It is about outcomes, right? And it is about ensuring it. But so how do we measure the outcomes and ensure it? Because, like I said, it is even internally, sometimes it doesn't dovetail. If a customer service agent can't get hold of somebody in forestry or whatever because they're working night, so how do we ensure to get it right, to measure those outcomes, to get it right?
So if I could just use that example, because the forestry service comes under me, so great. And that probably is a good example where, you get a query around a tree in your ward area, whatever, and it goes to a number of places, doesn't it? It goes to the CSC, the forestry team, it might go to Environment and Transport as well. So we need to make sure that our bit of the system is joined up. And I've certainly, just using that example, started talking to the forestry team around what our response rates are. And if it's a complex one, we tell people it's complex. We tell people it'll take a bit longer because we've got to look at who owns the land or whatever it may be. You can replicate that across a whole range of services. But the key for me is just thinking about the customer. And that's what we have to do, whatever we're doing. So, yeah, I think people are starting to think more about the quality of customer service and customer care, given the challenges we're facing. We've got some very, very stretched services for all the reasons we've talked about earlier, but customer service and customer care still has to be paramount.
So, Colin.
Thank you. Yeah, if I could just explain how the process is working in relation to how we have our home workers. So what we have is we have a policy and guidance notes that gives them the education that they need to actually understand how to set up the workstation. So every person that has a county council email address is then put into the system to have a DSE training course. So they must go through a training course that enables them and gives them the education to enable them to set up their workstation appropriately, because they would only be be working from home on IT kind of work in that respect. So all those people then have the opportunity to notify their manager that they have a suitable chair, that the working environment is suitable for them to undertake the work that they're being asked to carry out. If the manager then is unable to satisfy that employee's needs, that then gets transferred into health and safety, and then we are equipped then to go in and support the manager and the employee to ensure that they get the training, they get the education, there's a risk assessment attached to that, and we provide the relevant equipment. So all those little tiny things that we discussed then earlier on are all catered for in our home working procedures and guidance.
May I come back, please, Chairman? Sorry. So, I mean, that sounds all very well, but then if I'm running down the stairs and slip on my stairs, which are slippy, right, that doesn't relate to what you've just said, and I still sue you. What about if I plug my computer in and I live in a very old house and my electrics are very poor and I electrocute myself? So how do you deal with that? Because I'm still going to sue you. So how do I write a disclaimer, or how do I cover that going forward? Because what you're doing sounds great to me, but it relates to me sitting on my computer. It doesn't cover the unknown eventualities I could sue us for.
I think there are lots of issues there, and it's the way people are deployed and their contract of employment and how they work. We are talking about the workplace activity that we're asking them to do, and people naturally go to the kitchen and put the kettle on. They could get scolded. Equally, whilst they're finished their work and they go to make their tea during the evening, they could get scolded. I don't think I can, as a health and safety manager, eliminate those risks in everybody's household. However, what we do is we make sure that the work activity is covered for, and we make sure that that is as safe as we can do, as reasonably practicable.
Just one more, but if I am, and I'm being obstinate about this, but my work contract says I have got to work from 9 to 5 in this place, which is health and safety. So then we are allowing that flexibility, and even with whatever, but I can then still come back illegally because I've got that contract. And what I'm saying is, you know, I'm not arguing going forward, how can we ensure that we can avoid us being sued for everything and every other angle?
There's something about this long table I don't like. I was just going to say, if you're an employee having that conversation with me as your manager and saying, actually, you don't think it's safe for you to work at home because of those risks, I've got to take that into account and probably arrange for you to work in a workplace, whether that's somewhere it's a touchdown closer to where you live, whether it's County Hall, if that's your contractual base. But I think there's that side of the conversation as well as the more technical side of the risk assessment that Colin's talking about. So I think this is all about good communication and managers knowing and employees feeling able to say as well, you know, going beyond those urgent arrangements that we had during COVID, where people saying, my laptop's on an ironing board and I'm sitting on a kitchen stool, you know, which is one of the reasons we put that £200 allowance in place. Have those conversations, but then make sensible decisions, and that's part of the mitigation.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. So, Rosita, we've noted your reliability, and my advice to you would be don't run downstairs. So, moving on, I've still got Bertie and then Dan with questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep my questions brief because I know a short time. I've got two main questions, really. The first one is, how are we building the new ways of working into recruitment? So if we're recruiting someone into a team, does that person know they're going into a team, which is, you know, mainly virtual, because they might want more physical interaction? And then the second one, you talk about in collaboration, how you're using new workplace technologies, but only really cite Teams and SharePoint. So what type of technologies are you thinking about deploying which could enhance, you know, remote collaboration, metaverse maybe being one?
She's lost me there. I think the first one around recruitment, where we've got posts that are within the teams that we've been talking about, we're absolutely pushing that these are whatever phrases we use, you know, remote, hybrid, flexible working, because as I say, all our competitors are doing that. And, you know, we've even had conversations with some managers to say, we can broaden the geographical areas that we get people from. We don't necessarily have to get people moving into the local area to work. If someone is living, I don't know, 100, 150 miles away and is willing to come in once every couple of weeks to do all that connection stuff, but the type of job they do allows them to work more remotely, why wouldn't we widen our possible pool? So yeah, it's a big piece around recruitment. In terms of workplace technologies, I would have to defer to my IT colleagues. We know that it moves fast, and I think there's a different way of looking at it, which is what's the baseline that our employees are at. You know, we've made assumptions in the past around technical abilities, and those vary massively. And we employ an IT trainer who has been focused on Teams, focused on SharePoint, Office 365, etc., trying to get people to a certain level of being comfortable with those. But you're absolutely right. There will be other technologies that, you know, if they're right for us, financially and otherwise, we'll be able to put out. But we have to make sure that people can then exploit those. And you can never optimize some of the technology, but optimize as far as possible. So we have to, are we moving as fast as the technology would be the rhetorical question, I think, that goes with that.
Okay, thanks, Gordon. Dan.
It's most interesting listening to the debate and the questions and answers, and the whole thing just flows and flows forever. I still think it's about how we monitor. It's talked about for nearly 3 years, and you know, I've got a document. Well, your assurance provided on page 45, and you're talking will be trialled as part of our pilot, be run in room 700, County Hall, early 2022. Now we're at the end of nearly 2022, so that's just been. What I'm trying to say is, I'm not being horrible, but that's just, you know, who's read this and looked at it and thought, what are we sending out to people? Because it's just not helpful, because, you know, we're at the end of the year and you're saying you were trialing it and it's never happened. I am concerned because your language, Gordon, is always about managers. Now, how have you trained these managers? What do they understand about how they can discover productivity and how they can monitor it and do everything else? Now, I'm talking from a background that chaired a public company that actually had remote people all across the country. So we had to devise systems and assurances. So we had different times. So I knew at 2 o'clock most days, in those days it was all fax, you have information flowing through. I knew what productivity, I knew who'd turned up for work, I knew what was happening. And the final close was 8 o'clock at night. So I know, and even into Europe, it was just the same. There is nothing that I see that makes me feel that managers are trained and their minds are open to how they do things. I hear of groups. I mean, really, they ought to be set into groups of probably 8 to 9 people. So they have a meeting together for 15 minutes or 20 minutes before they start work. Then they have a meeting at the end of the work session. So they chat and they what you try to do really is replicate when you're at work, but you're doing it from a distance. And if this is going to prevail against lots of difficulties, and if it's the right outcome, I will support the right outcome always. But I don't think there's no initiatives. There's lots of ideas that I could talk about how you evolve and develop people. And it's a slow thing. And then you eventually find a team leader in that. And then eventually they talk about what was the best experience that day and what was the worst. And now you're beginning to grow information from your staff. And ultimately, there is a production and a control level behind that's creeping up slowly onto this. But it has to be managed correctly and delivered. And people have got to understand that this is an aid. you know, to know what they're doing all the time and watch is probably nearly impossible, but we have to discover methods, and the easiest way is to get people involved, and they voluntarily start to talk, and bit by bit you build up a consensus and an understanding and a knowledge until eventually those leaders all meet with the groups of other similar leaders once a month, and we keep the flow going. We're doing nothing but expecting managers who've managed in a normal business type environment and walked around. I've heard managers in the past say, well, it's amazing, I used to pick up on all the information, I could hear what they were saying and talking about, so we knew such a lot. We have no idea what's happening at the moment, and if we're expecting managers to suddenly have these skills and knowledge, well, I think we're probably expecting too much. So we need to do it for the longevity of this programme. Something has to happen, and you've got to unblock the log jam, because we're talking now 2 years, 2.5 years later about management control, and there isn't any. What I'm suggesting, there are ways, and I would be happy to talk and help in any way I can, but you've got to be able to smooth this thing, this interaction, and there's no interaction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Let me just come back briefly on that. I suppose the starting point, this was an action plan that came specifically from the Scrutiny Task and Finish group and then back through Scrutiny Commission. So it focused on what it focused on at that point in time. And there's lots that's been done since then. And I probably haven't put enough in the report about what's been done since then. So trying to keep it fairly concise. When you're saying the trial never happened, the pilot of Room 700 has been up and running for some time. It was intended absolutely early 22. We had some electrical work that needed to be done. It was a slightly later start to that. We've now at the end of this pilot, we're getting the outputs. We'll feed some of that back into all member briefing a couple of weeks' time, week on Tuesday, I think it is. So you'll see that actually there was a live pilot, lots of engagement, lots of feedback, and lots of ideas about how to improve both our accommodation, but also how people are working and engaging. Really good point around training and support for managers. It's absolutely crucial. And in fairness, that came out a lot in it was probably a seam through the Task and Finish group discussions. We've done lots and we continue to do lots. So whether it's organisation development, support, specific training for people to how to manage hybrid teams, how to focus on outcomes, how to manage remotely, etc., etc. We've got a whole policy framework and guidance, and there's something about local solutions as well. So when you talk about how people get together, I think I know of a number of teams who have what I would call, probably work too long with IT, daily stand-ups. So they get together 10, 15 minutes in the morning. Where are we today? What needs to happen? Same again the following morning. That might not be necessary for some teams, so they'll do them on a weekly basis. And yeah, and we haven't replaced or dropped the standard things like team meetings, supervisions, appraisals. All that infrastructure is still in place, and certainly some of the guidance is around, you don't have to come in for every team meeting, but it may be 1 in every 3 team meetings. Get together face to face, do some of your supervisions and certainly your appraisals face to face. So there is lots happening that probably this report doesn't reflect, and I think I've come back to I'll use the performance compendium again as a bit of a defence, but I think we've probably got a better grip of things and a better grip of our services than this report gives us credit for. No, that's a statement. It's not evidence. Just before you come back, we've had too many conversations about this. But the other thing we're focusing on is over the next couple of weeks is Smarter Working Fortnight. So putting something in the diary and putting some events on that people can go to get advice, guidance, support, and just keep the interest and keep it alive. So there's a range of things that we're doing, and I don't know, Sarah, whether you've got any examples of what we're doing within this fortnight, just to kind of bring it to life.
Yes, in terms of what we're doing, there's a range of sessions that are going on, particularly, well, they're aimed at managers and employees, but some of the manager sessions are around how to manage in a hybrid world, how to be productive in a hybrid world, and also events about, Gordon already touched on earlier, the IT training, events specifically around support around IT training, how to present with impact, and various other presentations that are going on, as I say, aimed at both managers and employees.
Okay, Dan.
Thank you. What I was trying to express is the communications with the actual groups of people, employees, at a smaller, more localized level, that it's simulated. And what I discovered is when you create that simulation that you're in an office, but you're not, but you have the normal greetings, hello, how are you today? And it's all that little bit, and then they close down when they go, and it starts to flow, but that can be very productive in gaining reports. It isn't something that straight away. This has to be a process where you get people there, they chat, they flow, then bit by bit it can start to lead to information. What this becomes is a management tool when it's owned and controlled correctly, and it's a start to create some sort, because I'm hearing all sorts, both from yourself and from Gordon, but tell me how, what's your mechanism? How do you understand what productivities from that group? Give me a figure each month. Is it gone up? Has it gone down? We've never even got anywhere near that door. That door's been closed for a long time. So what I'm trying to say is you've got to try and develop and coach the thing through, as well as develop the managers, knowing what is their goal, managing what are they supposed to achieve? What are their levels? What are their targets? Do they understand? And, it's an evolution. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I think that's probably a sort of comment and a statement, but I would be assured that directors, managers and all their teams in each of the responsible departments know what their departments should be delivering and obviously how they're delivering. But I think Gordon's taken on the points, and I think all I'd say to members, some good questions. I mean, we have got the all-member briefing at the end of the month, which is an actual face-to-face in the room briefing and a tour of room 700. So I'm sure there'll be people that won't be able to attend and that may well dial in. So you'll have to do a virtual tour of the room. So look forward to that technology. So we are asked to note the report and the progress being made towards the council's ways of working. So everyone agree we've done that. So, and I think we've had some good comments and conversations on it. So thank you. The next item 12, is the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Annual Report 21-22 on pages 53 to 92 of your agenda pack. And Colin Jones, Health and Safety and Wellbeing Manager, is here to present the report. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Chairman. The purpose of this report is to present to the Employment Committee the annual Health, Safety and Wellbeing Report for 21-22. The details of the Council's overall position on health, safety and wellbeing and provides an update on the performance of the Health, Safety and Wellbeing team. The County Council is required under the Manager Health, Safety and Wellbeing regs to have an occupational health and safety management system. The system requires the Council to have the health and safety strategy and to consult and communicate with all interested parties on the health and safety performance. The Council's Health Safety Strategy 2025 details key performance indicators for the Council, processes of which are included in the Health and Safety Wellbeing Annual Report. The health and safety wellbeing of all our staff and service users and customers is of paramount importance to us. The health, safety and wellbeing continuously monitor, so far as it is possible, the performance in this area to ensure that the Council meets its legal requirements where necessary and improves on the standards. The report details and shows a slight increase in the number of RIDDORs. The RIDDORs is the Reports of Injuries, Disease and Danger Occurrence Regulations, to which we notify the HSC. However, compared to other years, it's quite comparable. Slip, trips and falls continues to be our highest category. However, it's followed closely recently with their challenging behaviour and some violent instances, but they are lower than the previous pre-COVID reporting periods. During the year 2021, the Health Safety Wellbeing team recommended the use of health safety audits to carry out its number of areas within departments where checks were needed to be made. We had to suspend that during the COVID year for obvious reasons. Just like to reassure the committee that we are actually fully back on that programme, and we'll continue to monitor and audit the sections that we do. It's recommended that the employee committee note the health safety and well report and endorses the work undertaken by partnership departments by the Health Safety and Wellbeing Service to keep the council compliant in this area. And I'm willing to take any questions.
Thank you, Colin. Members, do we have any questions? Dan.
To page 60. I was quite startled because the way it's described as violent incidents. Can you explain what that's all about? Thank you.
Yeah, any violent instances, any instance that has caused a concern. It doesn't necessarily have to be, it could be a bite from a child to a teacher, it could be a pushing of a child to a teacher, or it could be a physical assault to a forward-facing council employee. And that's all categorised within our accident system, and that's what those data are made up from.
Any other questions? No, I mean, to me, it was a good report. It's informative, and I think the detail level is very accurate and very good. So, and I think it is good you've got a comparative from last year to this year. So, but no, if there's no further questions, can I thank you for the report? And we are asked to note the Health and Safety and Wellbeing Annual Report 21-22 and endorse the work undertaken in partnership with departments by the Health, Safety and Wellbeing Service to keep the council compliant in this area. So, do all members agree? Okay, thank you. Thank you, Colin. Good report. Thank you. Finally, report is item 13, the Organisational Change Policy and Procedure Action Plans. Damien's rejoined us after having a power outage, I think, again. So I'll hand over to Damien to go through the report, which is on pages 93 to 98 of your agenda pack.
Thank you, Chair. This is just a report that comes to each committee to advise, well, to update on the current action plans, which contain provision for compulsory redundancy and the details of progress of their implementation. And then we've got the two appendices which outline current and completed action plans. Members are just asked to note the report and the appendices.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, members Abbott and we're asked to note the report, and the action plan was just contain the provision for compulsory redundancy and details of progress and their implementation. So that's noted. Thank you. Item 14, only the actions taken by the chairman. As mentioned earlier, we don't have any items. And item 15, date of future meetings. Just to say there was obviously a typo on the last two meetings. They're obviously both 2023. But can I thank everyone for attendance, and I'm happy to close the meeting. Thank you for everyone online as well. Thank you.